Apologies about that. I had a few technical problems. Just try bringing Manjinder in straight away. Man,
Right, hey, how you
that's
doing?
much better. No crackly, clear picture.
What
Okay.
is going on with my phone? My phone's more expensive than my husband's. He's got some cheap old phone.
Oh, Paji to the rescue. Salute to Paji.
Not even that something I heard of. Anyway, there we are. Chal.
Okay. So we were talking about you got into rugby, you met up
Yeah.
a group of girls. I take it
Yeah.
BSU.
Yeah, so what happened was like I said, I grew up in a household that really like loved football, knew what FC stood for, obviously, saw these bunch of girls on a night out, and they had these jerseys on the back of them. It said Bath RFC. So I just said, what does the R stand for? I had no idea. They were like, oh, it stands for rugby. And then they were like, do you want to play rugby? I was like, no, I didn't even know what it was. And then I sort of vaguely knew, maybe actually, I think one of my brothers played. But I said, oh, I don't want to bust my teeth. And they were like, well, wear a gum shield. I was like, I don't want to wear shorts, wear tracky bottoms. So basically, for every like excuse I was coming up with, they were giving me a solution. And in the end, there was like, I just thought, why not? Why not give it a go, see what it's like? And it was great. And sort of the rest is history, really.
So what inspired you to take it up seriously?
Well, I mean, I suppose, look, until recently, I'd say I was lucky, but actually, I was talented in that sport just naturally, I think. And I, very soon got selected to play for England students. So,
how did that feel at the time? And how did you, when you told your family, what did they think?
Well, it's like, it's a bit surreal, really. You don't really realise it's happening. Didn't even think that was a thing. And obviously, it's, you're proud. It's a proud moment. And, I told my family, and I don't really think my mum and my mum and stuff didn't really understand what it was, didn't even know what rugby was, when you're on the phone telling them. My brothers got it, though. Like, they were dead proud. They were proud. But look, let's face it, back then, 30 years ago, rugby, certainly women's rugby wasn't a thing. It just wasn't heard of. It was, really niche still then.
And when you got selected for England, how did that feel like? Because obviously were you still a student then?
Yeah, I was a student. So, I got selected to play for England students. So, that's the highest level that I, was, that I, as far as I knew, was available to me. And it was fantastic. It was, I didn't know anything about the sport. Do you know what I mean? And like within a year or so, I've been selected. I didn't even know there was a Rugby World Cup, actually. There was a Women's Rugby World Cup just prior to that. I knew nothing about the sport. And then, just to get, to get to represent England, was a dream. Actually, in my first year, when I first got selected, a week before I was going to play my first match against Welsh students or universities, I actually broke my collarbone. So the first year I got selected, I wasn't able to play. And then the second year, I actually didn't get selected. And then I think what happened was another player got injured and I basically got a call up. And it was, really quite late. It was the end of the academic year. I think it was actually my final year by then. It was one of those things where you just couldn't say no to it. So I was like, yeah, I'll go up to Scotland.
So at that time, how many other Sikh girls or how many other Indian girls were playing rugby?
Yeah, it was none. There was none.
You were the only one.
And let's face it, it's not that unexpected, really. Given our sort of cultural background and the fact that we don't make up the majority of the population, obviously. So, but still, even then, in all the teams that I've played with, I could probably count on one hand the number of brown women I played against and Asian women. And when I mean Asian, I mean not just South Asian. I'm talking about all Asian. So, yeah, it wasn't really a popular sport amongst the Asian community, female community, anyway. But to be honest, at the time, it didn't really faze me. I didn't realise, really, that I suppose, was entering a field that wasn't, kind of trodden before, really. But yeah, there were none. There were none.
So obviously, being a Sikh to represent at that level must have been a proud moment. What was it like around the community, not just at the university campus? Because you went Bath, didn't you?
Yeah.
So obviously, BAFTA mostly wasn't many ages there, apart from if they're studying doctorate or lawyers or something.
Yeah, no. So I mean, the community, the obviously the immediate rugby community, my mates and stuff, they're all dead proud. But again, it's one of those things. Back then, it wasn't really recognised. So not only are you sort of you're not really getting the support, from the wider rugby community who consider that women should be playing that sport. Because even back then, there were those views that women shouldn't be playing rugby, shouldn't be involved in that sort of sport. So not only were you not really being accepted by your rugby community at the time, even wider society were, still of the view, what are women doing playing rugby, and certainly obviously in our community, that was more of a challenge.
So when you were growing up, who were your rugby inspirations? Players, like male players?
No, well, this is it. Obviously, growing up, no, I mean, growing up, I wasn't watching rugby, right? So I didn't have any role models like that. And then when I went to university, the only ones that you could see were on telly were the male rugby players. Yeah. And it was the era of Will Carling, I suppose, and stuff. I mean, I was a front row forward, so I used to kind of admire people like Victor Abugu, who used to play for Bath. He was a loose-head prop. Jason Leonard, he was a prop as well. So, I'd kind of admire those that were in the engine room, I call it, right in the front row,
Do you know the Natapaj?
No, not doing all the Natapaj. Doing all the damage.
Yeah, waiting for the ball to get to you and score a goal or a try.
Well, not even that. So in the front row, so the scrum, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's where, it's, you kind of need your strength, and that's where you kind of strong people are. I'm not saying that, if anyone is a back here and is watching that, it's not disparaging, but, it's quite tough in that scrum. So it's not for the faint-hearted,
Okay, what challenges did you face? So obviously, our own community were like, rugby, because obviously it's all cricket, boxing, football, and the household sports, isn't it?
Yeah, and bearing in mind, even if they do like those sports, it's kind of in the, it's the boys that they support them in. So, in terms of, for me, in terms of barriers, and it's nobody's fault. It's just the way it was back then. But of course, not only did I have, like I said, I had societal barriers where you just had society saying that women shouldn't be doing this sort of thing. Parts of the rugby community weren't actually supportive of women playing rugby. And then culturally, and then in your family, you've got apniya kuriya don't play rugby, biyah kar, roti bana, do this, and be servile, and compliant and get yourself ready for marriage, because that's the only way women were considered to be, the only future really for them to be happy was to be married and to have settled down. So I often talk like my journey into rugby, I often say, is very much like a rugby version of Bend It Like Beckham, but she got to realise her dream to go and play professional football, and I didn't get to realise it. Half the team that I played with when I was playing England students, a lot of them went on to play for full England, whereas I had to go home after. In fact, one of them is a coach for the British Lions female team now. But I had to go home, obviously, after university, and then it was kind of like, Irshad, and the other barriers were just not just that. There was financial barriers. So I went home.
Did you have financial barriers because buying the kit and everything? Obviously, it's not cheap, is it?
No. So not just buying the kit, but also when I went home, even if I had persuaded my family to allow me to continue playing rugby, there's no way my mum, and I wasn't driving then, so there's no way my mum, in Slough, right, which you know what Slough's like, or was back then, in the 80s, right? There's no way she was going to let me get a train to wherever I needed to get to, which was Richmond, I think, at the time. But on the way back, to get a train from Slough, from wherever it was, wherever Richmond Rugby Club is, get a train back, and then get off at Slough train station at 10 o'clock at night or whatever, and then walk back on my own. That just wasn't going to happen.
Because you know what? The other Sikh Games ambassador, the goalkeeper, Manveer Singh, the young he's my nephew. And I know what it's like, because my brother-in-law and my sister have to take him everywhere, to matches, practice, and they're just constantly busy.
Yeah, I mean, I had a chat, funny enough, with someone recently who has got a couple of kids that are quite successful in sport. And he was sort of saying, what I've heard commonly, which is if you're good enough, you'll make it. But the reality is in our community, that's actually not the case. So I was pretty good. Was I good enough? Well, we'll never know because, I never got to realize that dream. But I was in the right circles. I was, sort of emerging in that field. But for me, the barrier was, for me, it was the family. But for other people in our community, especially if they've, a language is a barrier, they're not, and they don't drive, say for example, or they're shift workers, they're not going to be able to drive their son and daughter from one end of the country to the other to do some training or some trials or whatever. When they've got probably 3 or 4 other children to look after as well. It's just. I think it's a myth. That if when people say if you're good enough you'll get there, because actually some people have a whole load more barriers in front of them just to get to that starting point.
Definitely. Okay, well, how did rugby shape you as a person you are today?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of it's
mentally and physically.
Yeah, I mean, it's it's a tough sport, and you do have to be mentally and physically tough when you're playing it, because you've got to be resilient and you've got to learn to play as a team. You've got to, sometimes I was captain and you've got those leadership skills. So, mentally, also it teaches you to, if you lose graciously. And if you losing isn't always a bad thing because you can learn from those experiences. Do you know what I mean? And then physically, yeah, back then, it was making me, I was having to train when I was playing English students. There was a few of us at university that represented England at whatever levels. We'd go circuit training at some ridiculous o'clock, like 5 o'clock in the morning, up at the university twice a week. So it was quite. I had to be self-disciplined as well, like do my own training. There was not that support there. You didn't have strength and conditioning coaches. You didn't have a whole team of people that were looking after you. I didn't have a scholarship. So, physically, I had to really look after myself and make sure that I was fit enough at the time to play.
Well, because Bath Uni is quite well known for rugby, isn't it?
It is, yeah. So I didn't know that when I went there. But yeah, I mean, because it's got a massive, the town, the city has got a huge rugby team, Bath Rugby. They were very, very popular and big back when I went in the 90s, and I knew nothing of that, But yeah, I soon became a Bath fan because I ended up playing not just for the university, I played for the city as well. So I played for the University of Bath on a Wednesday, and then I played for Bath women they were called Bath ladies then, on a Sunday. So you just play like a couple of times a week.
Were you the only